Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, January 16th, for our Planning, Economic Development, and Land Use Committee meeting. We've got two things on our agenda. We have interviews for the Sustainability Commission, as well as starting the conversation for Ordinance 65, 1, 11, 24. We're going to start with the interviews for the Sustainability Committee. But before we do that, can start with roll call, please.
Sure. I'm just going to say tonight we're joined by Chairman Ballerin, committee members Sergio Adams, Deb Zamer, and Tom Hoey. We're also joined by staff Shaniqua Jackson, City Clerk, myself, Jake Iceland, Research Council, Alyssa Kamara, who is the Junior Policy Analyst. We're also joined by Jason Thomas from the Corporation Council. We are joined by Avi Epstein, Principal Planner, and I believe we're also joined by Palomi Sen, who is a Senior Planning Project Manager.
Okay, excellent. So let's start with the interview process. Do we have, I'm checking with staff, do we have the candidates for Sustainability Committee?
The first candidate that we'll be interviewing should be Zachary Cunningham.
Okay, come on down, Zachary.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Hello.
Well, thank you for your interest in joining our Sustainability Committee. We're going to start off by just allowing you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and why you want to be on this board.
Sure. So my name is Zach Cunningham. Nice to meet you all. I live in Pine Hills. I've been in Pine Hills for about 7 years, been an Albany resident for about a decade. And really the main reason that I'm interested in being on the commission is because I feel, very passionate about climate work and sustainability, and also about our great city. So for professionally, I work for an entity called the Climate Jobs Institute, which is housed within Cornell University. I've been there for about 4 years, and I run our education and training programs. And the work that we do is really focused on how do we push for sustainability policies, how do we push for climate action at the scale science demands, while at the same time making sure that we're expanding opportunities, improving quality of living for folks, and creating lots of high-quality jobs along the way. So this is work, broadly speaking, that I'm engaged in every day professionally. And also motivating why I put in for this is that the last couple years especially, I've really felt a drive to get more involved civically. So I ran for library board last year. I did not win, but had lots of great conversations with folks around the city and saw this and figured since it's such an interest of mine professionally, sustainability issues, that it'd be a great chance to throw my hat in the ring and try to get involved. One other thing I just note is a lot of the work that we do at the Climate Jobs Institute is really focused on state and city level action for climate issues. And I think especially now with change in federal administration coming in, that action at the city level and buildings like this are going to be more important than ever in terms of trying to make progress on climate goals and building sustainable communities. So those are all some of the reasons that I'm interested in joining.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you and good evening. Just one brief, or maybe two brief questions. First question is, with your schedule and availability, when it comes to making the meetings and attending the meetings, do you foresee any other activities, coming in between your duties serving? And if so, how would you manage that?
Sure. So I do travel a decent amount for work, but fortunately I have a lot of control over my schedule. So meetings are on Thursdays. Like, there's a consistent schedule, correct? So I don't foresee any major issue being able to plan my work schedule around that. Of course, occasionally things might pop up, and in that instance, I'd, obviously talk with other folks on the commission, make sure I'm staying up to date, whatever I need to, but I really don't anticipate too many issues being able to attend.
And then final follow-up question, have you been paying attention or aware to some of the past previous meetings and some of the discussions that have been held in order to come into the role and get to work?
I have a bit. So I reviewed in preparation for this some of the old meeting minutes, looked through the document that I believe the Sustainability Commission put together around some of the key goals and policy recommendations. I'm also friends personally with one member of the committee, so I've talked with her over the last couple months just as I heard about the opportunity, expressed interest, and just got her perspective on what's happening. So I think, there'd be a learning curve like anything, but I think I'd be able to hit the ground running.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hoey?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Zachary, for coming and putting your name out there to serve on this the committee. I just want to commend you. I'm just looking at your resume now. Your work, union work. As soon as I saw Cornell, that's one of the big labor colleges around that, and then your work with CSEA, which is really good. Now, if you do get appointed to the sustainability, I'm sure they have different sections. Have you looked into, do you know what subcommittee you would like to be on that?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for your kind words. Second, I think the energy would be of interest. A lot of the work that I do professionally is around energy, especially renewable energy. So that one stuck out. And then I believe there was one focused on equity as well. And that's a cornerstone of the work we do. And I think there particularly, my experience doing workforce development, working with labor unions, could be an interesting lens as well. Because obviously when you're talking equity, it's race, gender, lots of different identities, but also thinking through how do you create workforce opportunities, expand those opportunities for folks from different communities who might not traditionally have access. So those were two that really jumped out at me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions by committee members? Do you have any questions for us?
Sure. I'm wondering from your perspectives what some of the major climate and sustainability issues that are facing Albany right now or that you're dealing with as the Common Council.
Does anyone want to answer?
I mean, I'll comment and say, one of the ongoing issues that I remember getting involved in a few years back was just the issue around pollution and some of the air quality around some of our public housing buildings and properties, whether it's downtown by the highway, by the train tracks, or just in busy, congested areas throughout the city. I believe that when it comes to sustainability, that is something that we should further look into. Over the years, there's people that have done studies and commissions that have also looked into it. But in terms of building a plan and adding that plan and putting action behind it, I think that's one area of focus.
Great. Yeah, and if I could just comment, that's so important because I think climate issues, pollution obviously affects everyone, but there are obviously pockets of our city that are more deeply impacted than others. So it's good to hear that.
Any other comments? Okay. Any other questions or thoughts?
Just curious about timeline for hearing back anything, if you know. I'm patient, so no worries if that's unclear.
Well, I want to appreciate the patience from all of the applicants for the Sustainability Committee. So we do appreciate everyone's patience in this process. We've got interviews today, then we have some more interviews, I think, next week. And then hopefully we wrap up the interviews within the next few weeks. and then be able to make our 2 appointments. So we have 2 appointments to fill, and we're trying to get that done in the next few weeks. So you won't know until we've made the decision on who to select, and then you'll get a call whether you're selected or not. We try to be respectful and private for all,
Of course.
who've been willing to put themselves out to volunteer on these boards. And the nice thing is, even if people who are not selected, they can still serve on several different committees from the board. You don't actually have to be a board member to serve on a committee, so there are options for everybody to still find a way to get involved. Okay? Any other thoughts? Oh, Councilmember Adams.
Just another comment I also think is very important is the education aspect of educating the public and residents on sustainability, what that is, and how it impacts them. Based off your experience, it seems like you have a wealth of knowledge and experience doing that. So I hope if you are appointed to this, that you and the other colleagues can work together to also think of initiatives and ways to really amplify what's going on and educating people about the facts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that's a deep passion of mine. Even before I started doing climate work, I was doing education work with CSEA, and then I was a public school teacher for a couple years as well. So thinking through how do we take complex ideas, really boil it down into the most digestible manner, and go out into the community and spread that word, I think is really important. Because ultimately, major action is only going to happen with public support and if the public is on board. So I think that's really critical.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And if you have any other questions, like to ask committee members in the future, please, you can email us, and we'll be more than happy to try to get you through the process.
Great.
Well,
Thanks
thank
for
you
your
again.
time.
And I'm going our legal counsel, Jake, had a few comments he needed to make.
One additional thing that we are also joined by Jasleen Jaspal, who is a senior planner. And then the next interview will be with Andrew Matrai. I will say the original interview was scheduled for 6, so I'd give him
We're ahead of schedule. That's a good thing. That's a good problem to have.
a little bit of time.
Okay, so since we're a little ahead, I don't want to jump into the next ordinance just yet, because he may get here a little early. Let's see if he's here.
Take a short recess while the clerk goes to see if he is nearby.
We'll take a 3-minute recess. We'll get back at 7:50. Okay. Okay, so we're going to end our recess. Andrew, thank you for joining us. We are ahead of schedule, so thank you for being here a little early for us. We appreciate that. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you'd like to be on the Sustainability Commission?
Yeah, so my name's Andrew Matrai. I've been living in Albany now since 2020. And since then, in my day job, I work as a software engineer. But you know, when asked about like what I like to do or what I do, it's usually been involved within advocacy within the past several years. Particularly with the groups of like Albany Bicycle Coalition, Walkable Albany, and like volunteering with like Love Your Block. And one of the reasons why I wanted to join the Sustainability Committee was because I really liked what they've done. I feel like overall the Office of Sustainability has contributed pretty well to like improvements in quality of life within Albany. In particular, I like the compost program. I thought it was really cool to get like a free like compost like bucket and composter. But I think that it might have some blind spots, particularly in areas like transportation. And I kind of wanted to at least like provide like a voice for that. So a lot of what I've seen the Sustainability Commission do, like there has been like some really great pushes, like the pushes for like more of like the EV chargers. But I think that like what I can bring to the table is to give like a different perspective for a series of like alternative like methods of transportation, and I think like those could be really important to bring about within this. And like I feel like the Sustainability Commission provides a good angle to like help advocate for those things and sort of see what can be done within the city to improve like things like transportation, even if it's kind of like, you know, the main objective is sustainability, but yeah, that's my reason.
Okay, thank you. Questions from committee members? Councilmember Saber.
Thank you. Thank you for being here and for your interest in serving the community. Can you tell us how your background and your skills, what you think, how they would contribute to the commission?
Yeah, so I think like one of my skills is that like I feel like I've been able to diversify like my skill sets and knowledge over the past several years, and like dilly-dallying in, you know, different like, you know, forms of advocacy, whether it's talking to people, whether it's like gathering data, whether it's analyzing data. And I feel like I kind of like bring like a jack of all trades set of skills to the table. And I think that that's incredibly beneficial for anything related to like local governments, just because it's, you know, very much you have to do things yourself. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you guys know a lot more about that than I do, though. So.
Councilmember Adams.
Thank you again, Andrew, for joining us this evening. Maybe quick question. Can you go or provide an example in regards to transportation of how your background, or any ideas where your background can provide a new perspective to something? So you mentioned transportation. Do you have any areas within transportation, walkability, that you have identified that, you know, can be presented to the board?
Yeah, so in my day-to-day, like my bicycle, my e-bike is my main form of transportation. Although I did come here by car today because it was very cold. My bike is broken right now, but, so, you know, and I take the bus, like fairly frequently. I've basically like used like all the main ways to get around Albany, except for like the car ride share thing. I haven't done that yet, but so I think I don't have any like particular initiatives or an agenda. I just kind of want to see, I guess, first like what's possible within the Sustainability Commission, because I know that there are limitations, and I also know that it's, you know, we have a Department of Engineering now. We have, you know, a lot of other people that are working on, you know, these strictly like infrastructure-related problems. I just kind of wanted to, I guess, provide like a voice for someone who, you know, not only advocates for using active transportation, but who also like has it as a pretty like important part within my own life. So, yeah.
Thank you. Another follow-up question. With this role and this commission, it's very important that we are educating residents to, again, learn or embrace new, greener practices, smarter ways to do things. How do you feel about where we currently are with some of the initiatives that we've done so far, whether it was the compost or any of the other initiatives? Do you think we're in a good spot, or do you think there's initiatives or ideas that, again, your skill set can bring here?
So I think, yeah, so like, I really like the composting thing, and I think like that was like, I think that was overall like carried out like pretty well to the residents. You know, you like like every major event like Tulip Fest or something, like there's always someone standing out there with like those big composting things and like helping tell people about things. And, you know, like communicating with the public like that, I think has been pretty like useful. It's like that's how I find out about these things. That's how I find out about like volunteering opportunities with other organizations. As far as like things that I think we could be doing better, like smaller, more achievable things, I think that we can like look towards like other cities in the area that are doing like a lot of really like interesting things. One of my favorite examples is Montreal. Montreal, like they integrate like their sustainability like initiatives in with their like water management like pretty effectively, and it's very visible to people. So what I mean by that is that when you're walking along some of the streets in Montreal, they have these green spaces and these medians that are like, you know, separators for like cars and pedestrians, bikes and all that. And instead of just like grass inside of them, they'll often, you know, plant things like native, like plant life. You know, things that like, you know, not only like retain water better, but, you know, add to city beautification. And I think it's, if you see like a patch of grass versus, you know, seeing like a patch of like native wildflowers, I feel like that communicates to the city residents, like, you know, like the patch of wildflowers is, you know, it's a lot more, it's a lot prettier to look at. You know, you get to actually see some value for like your tax dollars and stuff. And sorry, did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Excuse me, yes, for the most part. Again, it just seems like you have like a lot of involvement in like community organization. So again, like when it comes to the education part of, you know, notifying residents of different ways, healthier ways to do things, you know, your involvement within the community to amplify that is going to be very important. So it's just asking, you know, if you had, you know, ways to really get that information out
Oh.
there and, you know?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite ways is just simply face-to-face. You know, I've tabled a fair amount at these different events, you know, mostly for Albany Bicycle Coalition and Walkable Albany. And I've been, you know, communicating like a lot of these ideas, mostly around like road safety, but they are sustainability related as well. And, you know, many of the people that I've talked with, some of them have had, you know, little to no interest in any of this or have never given it any thought. And I felt like it was, you know, I still played a role in planting that seed in their minds, like, hey, these are problems that, you know, not only exist, but, you know, there's achievable solutions out there. And I've got a fair amount of experience in, like, communicating with people, not as much on a microphone in a room, but, you know, just generally, like, one-on-one, face-to-face, so.
It's the best way to do it sometimes. Thank you.
Councilmember Hoey?
Thank you, Chair. And Andrew, thank you for coming. We've communicated maybe almost 2 years ago, and there was no openings on this. So I really respect that you stuck with it, and now I'm so glad that we got you in here, you know, to talk to you and, you know, look at your resume and what you do. I do know that you go to like planning meetings and testify. You're active in the community. I've seen you around, so I really think you'd be a good fit for the committee. Now, if the committee's made up of different sub groups, what would you think you'd like to focus on if you got on?
I'd probably have to review a list of the subgroups first, just
Okay.
because I'm blanking on those right now.
Yeah, I'm
but-
sure transportation will be one of them, and I didn't know if that's the way that you were, you know, looking, because you did talk about
Yeah.
it.
I mean, you know, even on like a, maybe not so much, like, I'd still like to learn, like, there's things that I don't know a whole lot about, but I think are really interesting, like, in particular, like, the urban agriculture. You know, I've been to, like, the Radix, and and one of my favorite things about Albany is, you know, seeing, like, on some of these lots that there's these gardens that people just, like, start, like, these community gardens, and I think that that's something I'd like to learn more about. I don't, like, have a green thumb, but I have grown tomatoes.
Yeah.
So it'd be cool to kind of learn more about, like, the specific challenges of urban agriculture and how that can, you know, help improve the sustainability of a committee or of a community.
We were talking too just previously about how to educate people. I see you have the production, you know, the TV and working for Disney. Is that something that could lead, you know, do you have a talent in that area as far as brochures and other stuff in communication?
If it was mass-produced, possibly.
Okay.
Most of my like skills are centered around like like most of my work skills are primarily like software engineering and, you know, I've done a lot of like media development as well, and I guess that can be an asset in, you know, facilitating like communication, whether it's like, you know, creating like shorts, you know, for different like social media platforms, things. So yeah, I think like those.
I think you would bring a great deal to the committee.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for applying.
Okay, any additional questions from committee members? Andrew, do you have any questions for us?
I do not.
Okay, well, thank you. If you do have any questions after you leave here, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we do our best to answer them. Just to give you a little bit about the process, so we're interviewing several candidates. We have 2 positions we need to fill. We're not going to make any decisions until we interview all of the candidates. So we've got 2 interviews today. We have a few next week, and I think we're going to try to get it all wrapped up within the next few weeks. Then we will reach out to the candidates, all the candidates, before we make any public announcement. But thank you again for your willingness to volunteer on this and your service to our city.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Here we're going to shift. I shift to ordinance 65, 111, 24. Before we have Plan Department speak to us, I know former Councilwoman Judy Duche has some comments she'd like to make, so I'd like to give her the floor.
So good to see you all. I've been hibernating because one illness after another. So most of you know that when I served on the council, I was very involved in looking at the USDO and then the rewrite of the USDO. I was aware with the initial rewrite of the USDO back like 6-7 years ago that there was huge problems with what had been drafted by the consultants regarding the sign ordinance. We, in consultation with council's office and the planning department, then made, I want to say, some hasty changes to it at that time. And we always hoped that we would really revisit it in more detail the last time around, but again, we ran out of time as some of us were getting ready to leave the council. So I think it's great that you're taking a look at the sign ordinance, and I would like to comment on some very specific provisions in this, as well as just highlight a couple things that maybe you want to take a closer look at. My understanding is that to some extent, I think the biggest changes are increases in the amount of signage being allowed and the size of the signage. And I have heard that the BZA is feeling like it's getting too many applications. I don't think that the BZA getting too many applications is a basis for saying, oh, this is a problem. It is business people and sign people advising them, who then are paid sometimes because of the size of the signs, that are saying, oh, we need to go for a variance on something. The other thing is, I pay some attention to the BZA. I think you guys should get some figures on exactly how many sign variances there have been, because I think in the last year there's only been about 10 applications, and total the BZA's workload has gone way down. They are compensated. So they are, it's an old building, isn't it? And I think that they've had like 20 to 25 applications in the last year. That's not a lot. As somebody who recently reviewed over 3,000 applications on the Board of Assessment Review in 30 days, I don't think 25 applications is a lot. With that said, I want to say that, let me go through a few things here. On page 3, I just want to note that the severability provisions are being taken out of this. This is an area for which there are a lot of constitutional issues, potentially with property rights, existing property rights, freedom of speech, in which I think the severability clause is a good thing to retain. Now, maybe since I drafted legislation, there's some overriding principles that make that unnecessary. My thing is not numbered. Let me see if I can do 1, 2. I think I'm on page 4. At the bottom of the page, it has a definition of sign height. And I think that this is really important, probably needs some clarification. Because sign height for a sign on a wall, basically this says it's measuring from the bottom of the sign to the top of the sign. So sign height in that instance means one thing. If it's a freestanding sign on a piece of property, it means another, but it looks like it's not necessarily, there's an ambiguity here. You could read it as not looking at the sign height from the ground, but looking at it for just the actual signage of the sign. So that while the sign heights, for example, in residential areas is like 4 feet or 5 feet, which is very reasonable, and you don't want to have it be really obtrusive in a residential area, even where there's a commercial property. You might wind up having it be 8 feet off the ground and then being 4 feet. So something just, I think, it's a good thing to look at it in terms of providing clarification. I'm going to the charts, the new charts. I want to note, it says no sign shall contain flashing, blinking, fluttering, or strobe light effects. There's some people that think neon signs going on and off is not okay. Is it okay? That may need a little bit more clarification. You do in this allow certain signs in certain locations to have changing text, but it then doesn't address anything else with regard, there's like this no man's land. Is that the only thing that can be changeable? And I think, again, clarification. I note then on the next page at the bottom, it says MUNC and MUCU in special purpose districts, up to 30% of a permitted detached sign area may be electronically or manually changeable copy. And my question is, what about MUNE? What about residential districts? Are you meaning to exclude those? If so, I think it'd be helpful to say that. I also want to note, as you look at this, please keep in mind that you have these form-based districts. And the form-based districts are really very different kinds of districts. In the Midtown area, it's mostly like around residential area. And then you have Central Avenue. And then you have the Warehouse District. And you have the South End, which has a lot of residential property. I think that you want to not say every place in the South End can have these changeable signs and other signage. So that's a tricky one to be looking at. Menu boards. Menu boards don't get defined till the end of this, which I think is confusing. And I think it is a sandwich board a menu board? And how does a sandwich board fit into this? I do think menu board should be under the types of signs or a subset under the types of signs rather than being at the end. I think that they're referring to like your McDonald's or your Chick-fil-A or whatever. But I don't think it's clear. So you could have 50 square foot sandwich boards. Where are they? Where is this allowed? I think potentially limiting it to certain zones also would be appropriate. Okay, now I am getting to these signs. I think you need, I think let's use common sense on this. I think a lot of what they have done is good. I do question whether a RV district needs up to 50 square feet of wall signs and then also another 64 square feet of detached signs. So, and this is a whole issue where they now allow both wall signs and detached signs in things like residential districts. Does that make sense? So, this area back here, that's a little over 2 feet high, and 20 feet would come over to like here. So that's a 40-foot, square foot sign on a building someplace in a residential village district. Some of these village districts are smaller than others, so I do wonder if that's appropriate. I think it previously was 30 square feet. It would be actually, it would be very helpful if you guys had the benefit of a crosswalk on these particular sign sizes, I think, so you know how much you're jumping up and where. I also note that this did not make sense to me. It looks like form-based Central Avenue has smaller signage allowances than form-based South End. And I'm not sure why that is. And again, look at the fact that they're now saying, okay, you can have these individual signs and then you can have cumulative signs that can significantly increase the amount of signage that you're seeing in a particular neighborhood. Mixed-use community highway, 200 square feet of cumulative signage. 200 square feet, that's a lot. That's 20 by 100. I understand that we don't have much in the way of MUCH, community highway areas, but not sure, and some of these other ones, community institutional, 400 square feet. And for the community highway, it says that the maximum number of attached signs per shop front is not limited. Then you have 1 square foot for each linear foot of building frontage, not to exceed 64 square feet. I can't figure out what that 200 square feet then means in terms of when you apply it to this other one. I guess maybe you could have almost 3 signs that are each 64 square feet in a mixed-use community highway. Detached signs, same kinds of issues. Now, the detached signs, that's especially where your sign heights of 4 feet and 5 feet, what does that mean? And I think in some cases the detached signage height is appropriate to be something that is higher than what is allowed here in some of these big commercial areas. So it may be that you want it to be 8, 10, 15 feet off the ground, but only have it be 8 feet high. I don't know. And in a RV district, you now have 64 square feet of detached signage allowed in addition to the wall signage. MUNE, I noticed the detached signage for MUNE and MUNC. This is a little bit tricky. I would think that you don't want to allow detached signage in MUNE and MUNC unless there is some setback from the sidewalk. There's really not a need for a detached sign unless you're driving down the street and, for example, we have Over It on New Scotland Avenue. It's set back like 20 feet, so it has a wall sign and then it has a detached sign. But the Albany Ale and Oyster doesn't need a detached sign. if you have a setback of 4 feet, do you really need a detached sign? So I think taking a look at that. Again, I also noticed that these are very high amounts, and taking a look at what exists and what is being now allowed is the whole purpose, to eliminate all the need for applications to the BZA. I want to talk about off-premises signs, and these are a lot of your billboards kind of signage. This is confusing to me. It says, unless otherwise limited by this USDO, off-premises monument, post and panel, and pole signs are permitted. And I don't know what the point of that is when it says, then 2 lines down, off-premises signage, including billboards, is prohibited, except in the following designated areas. So I'm not sure, number one, there is needed or what the intent was there. And I think that's, I want to mention for non-conforming uses, non-conforming signs, you don't have anything in here that addresses the fact if a sign is no longer used, that if the business is no longer located there, that it doesn't have to, nothing that says it should be removed. I believe that might be in a section of the USDO that deals with non-conforming uses. And it might still be there and might specifically address that issue. It might be good to cross-reference that. The other issue with non-conforming uses, if somebody put up a sign at some point and it doesn't comply with the existing code, you want to make sure that if, as we have with non-conforming uses, if the non-conforming use ceases to exist and be used for over a year, then you no longer have the benefit of being grandfathered in for that non-conforming use. I would be glad to take any questions. I don't know if that's appropriate.
You opened yourself up for that. But, so are there any questions for former council member? No? Okay. Okay, so Judy, if you don't mind, you could stay with us. We'll allow planning to do the presentations, and
Sure.
you know, we'll allow you to stay and have a conversation with us, if you don't mind.
All right.
Like the old days. We gonna have planning department? Judy, you can take a seat if you want. Okay, let us know when you're ready.
Just loading up here, so
No
just be a
problem.
minute. What's the hotkey?
So I think what we gotta do, gotta like display.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, and I know this is something that we tried to take on when we started the rewrite the USDO many years ago. So I know this was one of those that we said we're going to hold off for the next council. So here we are. I think almost 3.5 years later. So could you give us a little information about what we have in front of us?
Yep. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to present it, and good evening to everyone. So essentially just going to go through the proposed ordinance, kind of the reasons how we got here, and then I'll attempt to address some of the comments that came up and just go through in a little more detail the provisions of the proposed ordinance. So one of the main things that is a driver for us in terms of reviewing the USDO is the various applications that we receive, whether through the Planning Board, the Historic Resources Commission, or in this case, the Board of Zoning Appeals. So we had noted that as of recently, we've seen a sharp increase in the amount of area variance applications with 50%, and that's 100 applications for signs, and the other 50% being for the other elements that someone might apply for an area variance for. That's shown on the left-hand side here, and then on the right-hand side, if we were to look at those the variances for signs, what are the status of them, we've seen that about just under 80% of them have been approved. 18% were withdrawn by the applicant, and 5% were denied by the board. So we've noticed, from staff, from findings from the BZA, that there's certainly a common theme as to the variances that they're reviewing, especially the variances that they are approving. They're often found in the same areas within the city, and they often relate to the same underlying issues with specific provision for signage. So we've had 100 applications for an area variance related to signage since 2017. But we've seen a sharp increase with just over 70 applications now since 2021, and I think we're at 15 or 16 last year. Here's just a breakdown of those variances for signage. This is kind of where we can see where people are applying for things that really don't comply. So what are the actual elements of the sign that people are looking to deviate from? The largest component would be size area, so like the square footage of the sign. The next two, where I'd say are the other common themes here, would be the number of signs per that property or per that business, and the overall sign height. We've also gotten a couple for illumination, and then one or two under like miscellaneous categories. Here's an example of a property, I believe it's in the 700 block of Central Ave. It's in the mixed-use community highway district. So this is a property that applied for, I think it was a total of 6 or 7 variances just for this. So there were previously signs, this is the destination Kia, there were previously signs on this business, but under their corporate branding and redoing them, applying under the code as it currently is, the signage was, the problem is there's too many wall signs, even though they were reducing the number, and the size of them was too large, even though, again, they were reducing the overall size. The smaller picture, I realize it's kind of hard to see from here, but the smaller one on the bottom, that's the freestanding sign. And granted, it is a taller sign that's about 30 feet, but you can see how a 30-foot tall sign, the sign height is certainly contextual, whereas it doesn't look necessarily out of place in the Central Avenue area here next to all the car dealerships, whereas I'm sure it would in a residential district. Just as a kind of like a process note on this, this application itself took about 3 months of review, so it's about 2 public meetings, and just a lot of time from staff to review these and to go through them, even while they're trying to essentially bring their sign closer into conformance with the code, since they were reducing the overall size. This is just another example here we have on the bottom. That's where the price dropper Market 32 previously was. guess it's kind of hard again to see here, but I've outlined the different signs in red there, so you can see that, it's a property with a long frontage. They often have a lot of different signs, one big one and other smaller ones. On the top, you can see the newer signs that were approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals. So even though the prior business had signs that were actually larger than these, when Market 32 went in, they weren't allowed to have similar signage to either what the prior business had or to what they had at a different location, so they had to go to the board for 5 separate variances. And I note too that just, it's not only noted that there have been a lot of variance applications, we've also had a lot of, done a lot of research into the best practices from other municipalities, how we can improve our code in general. The area variances are just one kind of, it gives us one glimpse into the code and some of the issues that we run into for different businesses in different parts of the city. So the goal with the revisions that we're reviewing tonight is really, I'd say measured flexibility. And signage is a very difficult element to really regulate because there's lots of different types of signs, lots of different sizes. There's a lot of different types of buildings and building sizes. You have varying street frontages, so if your code is based on how large the building is or how large the frontage is, that can vary wildly from one zoning district to another and even within one zoning district. And then, lastly, trying to appropriately balance both the needs and desires of an applicant and our business community and others who wish to have a sign, and the design standards, and especially within context to our neighborhoods, wanting to make sure that they're, signs that are allowed are done in a way that's appropriate and that's not, out of the contextual element of that surrounding area. And just a note, and this was actually brought up previously, but the content neutral ordinances, so there was a Supreme Court decision 2015, which is Reed v. Town of Gilbert. And basically the takeaway of this is that you cannot regulate sign content. And that boils down to a couple things, but it really means for us and for everyone, it limits the speaker-based provisions. So in other words, you can't, you can't tell someone what they can put on their sign, but the other thing is you can't regulate on a very specific type of use. So the example I was giving here was a gas station versus a restaurant. I think we would probably all imagine that they have different types of signs. I definitely envision a gas station having a certain set of signage versus a restaurant. But under the Supreme Court decision, you can't, in your code, make a differentiation between those things. There are ways of making other differentiations that still comply and have been upheld, but wanting to just make sure that in the code we were careful not to be in violation of this. And just to add too, so that also adds an extra layer of complexity because you have to try to find a way within the code to speak to all the properties in the city, all the different frontages and zoning districts that have myriad of different circumstances. So I don't imagine that any version of ordinances will solve all the sign issues. I imagine there'll still be variances, there'll still be people who just are denied an application because it doesn't meet the code, but I think this helps to get at a solution. So one of the main things in this proposed ordinance is that it would be introducing specific methods for calculating the sign area and height. Would be replacing the current open-ended language. So that's really been a problem just because the current code doesn't specify at all how to calculate sign areas, so it's really differed from person to person. We've done our best as a department and working with the building department to try to have a set standard in how it's done, but the code just doesn't speak to that. So, try as we might, it definitely differs from one person to the next, or just based on the year that it's been reviewed. So in doing this, we were looking at best approaches from local municipalities like Troy, Saratoga, Buffalo, Schenectady as well, and also looking at some studies that were done specifically just outside of Pittsburgh, I believe it was. And trying to make sure that any calculations we have are predictable for the applicants and staff. We want to make sure that, just like the comments before, if there's A lack of clarity in the calculation methods is something we definitely want to correct. Here's an example. These are the images that would be included in the code. So I hope that the bottom left image would help lend some assistance to understanding what we're intending to get at with the sign height. So let me just refer back to the code for a second here. So I'll start with the image on the top left. This is specific. This would fall under, I'm not sure which copy you have. I know I had sent out the one with the images, but can always recirculate that. So that top left-hand image is for signs on a background. The language used by most municipalities is really common. So the idea here would be essentially if the sign's on a backer or on a background, you're calculating the area of that entire sign framework. So those three different signs you see on the top left-hand corner are all examples of signs on a background. They'd all be calculated the same way. Those are just some different ways you might see them in the city. The one in the top right-hand corner is also a wall sign, or as we would now be referring to it in the code as a, well, it's still a wall sign, but it's an attached sign because it's attached to the building. And so you would be calculating it based on the area of the freestanding letters. This is also a common practice because there is no material, there is no sign that's on the facade of the building where there's a space in between the letters. So it's very common to provide a different method of calculation for those types of signs. The bottom of the left-hand image, that's for the sign height. So sign height isn't really, I'm trying to think through it right now, but not something necessary for an attached sign, such as like a wall sign or a projecting sign. There are other provisions in the code that kind of get at that, but the sign height here is really specifically meant for a detached sign, and we can certainly add that into the code if that helps for clarity. Let's go back to the actual language here. So for sign height, it says sign height is measured as the vertical distance from the base of a sign or sign structure to the highest point of a sign or sign structure. So the idea being, I think if you look at the image on the left-hand side where it's kind of a post and panel, and if you were to imagine that area, the blank space just underneath where it says sign, if that's an open area where so let's say someone could walk through that, the sign calculation for the height isn't starting where it says sign, it's starting basically at grade. And the same thing's being shown with the other freestanding sign where your grade change might differ. So you're not measuring it from the high point, you're measuring it from where that base of that structure actually starts. And with that image too, if you're looking at it, so you have a sign element like a backer that's being placed on like a more monument or pedestal style structure, and again, you would calculate that whole thing as part of the sign height. That's how we've currently been interpreting it, so that's not really a change, it's just kind of codifying it, making it clear to applicants and to staff. And then in terms of the vertical distance height, that would be the image on the bottom right, and that's just showing like the clearance that you would need for any sign that's projecting, especially with consideration for one that's over the sidewalk. Here's an example, and again, I'm sure it looks much better on paper where you can actually see it, but these are three different signs. Just wanted to show kind of how we would calculate them with these calculation methods. So the one in the top left-hand corner where it says far shot, so those are individual channel letters that are independently put onto the building, so those would be calculated independently. If you were to take the legal aid society sign that's on a backer, so you're not just taking the letters because the sign's on a structure or a backer, you're taking essentially the outline, the frame, or the height and the width of that to calculate your sign area. And then if we're looking at the image on the far right, that would be a projecting sign, also a type of an attached sign, but it's a projecting sign. So one thing would be it's a one-sided, although it's a double-sided sign, you're only calculating one side of it. It's not, you wouldn't calculate both sides and add them together, it's just the one. and also just showing that you're calculating the entire framework of that sign. And there's also language in the code that remains from the existing one in terms of how far out a projecting sign can go. That hasn't changed. So a lot of the regulations that are in here, and I should have started with this, a lot of the regulations that are in here in the existing code do still remain or have been tinkered with. I know the ordinance can look a little aggressive in a sense because there's a lot of strike-throughs, but it's a lot of moving sections of the code to different areas. So if there's anything that was missed, or if there's any questions about elements that you think may have been taken out erroneously, I can certainly go through that, but we believe that we have included all of those provisions and not lost anything. Now looking at how we are approaching the table, again, I know this is a little hard to see here, but main thing was creating two tables. So in the existing code, there's one table, and it includes, it's a table 375.4.9.1, and it includes the freestanding, wall, projecting, awning, and then it has a note section. What we've done is we have split that into two different sign tables. We tried to get everything in one, but it becomes very difficult to display the information to anyone when you have all of that crammed into one table. And there's also significant differences between an attached sign and a detached sign. So what we mean by attached sign, and it's also defined in the new ordinance, would be things like a wall, projecting, awning, canopy, marquee. Those are all attached as they're attached to the building or that structure itself. A detached sign would be your typical freestanding signs, like a monument-style sign, pylon-style post and panel. A pole sign would be a version of a detached sign as well. Those are prohibited except for the billboards. So that's the main part here, is we've created two different tables so that we can include some different information that pertains to each attached versus detached. The next element here, and this is just looking at the attached, is that the signage regulations within the residential zoning district would remain relatively unchanged. Really, the only change here is the size for the RV district, where it was previously, let me just pull it up. Previously had 6, and this would be to 20, and then a cumulative size area of all the attached signs at 50. And just to reiterate, so the maximum individual sign size, so you can't have a sign that would be greater than 20 square feet, but you could in theory have, let's say, 2 signs that are 20 square feet each. The reason for this is there's a great number of residential village zoning districts that have large signs that are actually quite larger than the 20 square feet. I believe when we looked at them, I think there's maybe one out of all the RV districts that did not have a multitude of non-compliant signs. So this would help to get that more into compliance. One of the more recent examples was the One Sandage Way, where they were looking for signage to be on the building and also a detached sign. And they would have needed multiple, they did need multiple variances to allow for that signage, even though we from a contextual perspective, believe that the size was appropriate, and they're about 20 square feet. Most of the applications or prior applications that we were able to find that have, even going back many years, even before the USDO, for signage within the RV districts, they look like they're about 20 square feet. Again, there's plenty of signs within that district that are quite large, maybe 3 or 4 times the size. So we'll be looking to make it contextual at that 20 square feet and have that cumulative area of 50 square feet. There's also footnotes attached to the maximum number of signs. This is very similar to how the current code is written. So it does have provisions where it's limiting it to multi-unit dwellings or non-residential uses. So you're not just going to have, just as it is now, you're not just going to have anyone getting a wall sign on every single property in your residential zoning district. It's restricted to that particular type of building. So the R1s, the R2s, RT, RM, essentially unchanged. The MUNE, MUNC, MUFM, MUFC, those in terms of size are pretty much the same in terms of the maximum individual sign size with the 24 square feet, but allowing more flexibility so that they can have up to 32 square feet, but giving the business or the applicant an ability to come up with their way of how they want to get to 32 square feet, if that's what they so desire, because they could have one sign of, at 24 square feet, they could have another at 5 if they wanted, and so on. So the other element here is that it would allow for 2 signs. So it's still capping the number of signs per frontage or shop front, but it is allowing them to have 2 now. If we look at most businesses within those districts, the majority of them have a minimum of 2 signs, if not more. The MUCU, MUDT, MUFS, and MUFW districts, those are similar to what was there before. It's a little bit different, so going from 24 for some of those districts up to 32 square feet, and going from 1 to 2. With a lot of the businesses that are in some of the more either form-based or districts that have a little more of a pedestrian aspect to it, there's often a need for some type of sign that's parallel to the wall, like a wall sign, and a sign that's perpendicular to the wall, because it's very difficult to see if you're a pedestrian to see a certain type of sign, where it's much easier to see if you're going the other way. For the MUCH, specifically, this is the most difficult district we have in terms of trying to get signs, trying to find the right balance of signs that would comply with the code and signage as it currently exists in the code. So that district, and I'll go through that in just a bit, has a lot of signs that are out of compliance. It's an area where buildings are often set back farther from the street, so it's more common to have larger signs. I'm really not sure of any business in the MUCH district that has just 1 sign, so we'd be looking to increase that number. So there is no limit on the number of signs, but you are practically limited by your ability to only have a certain number of square feet as a cumulative total. So the example that was given before is correct, where you could have 164 square foot sign, you could have another one, and then you could have, let's say, another sign somewhere else in the building. And a good example of that would have been that Market 32, where they had a larger sign, but then they also wanted to have ones that said recycling on one end or florist on the other, or to help differentiate the different sides of a larger building. The 200 square feet cumulative total, it certainly can sound like a lot when you're looking at this. When you look at these properties, if you look at various examples of them, it's not that much when you're talking about larger parcels, again, that have a very large frontage. The average is significantly higher than other districts, and the types of buildings are oriented around cars and vehicles. So that's also a very typical sign method that code sometimes uses based on how fast a car is traveling and they're at the average speed on a street. It does get very complicated, so we wanted to stay away from that, and that was recommended under the best practices to avoid that. Other districts, just quickly here, would be the I1, I2s, or industrial districts, looking to increase the number of signs, but having that be based on the size of the frontage, just like with the MUCI, or the Campus Institutional District, allowing those to have 64 square foot signs. We have, if you look at Albany Med, is a good example of property that's in the MUCI district. Most of their signs are probably closer to about 90 to 100 plus square feet for wall signs. Especially as they go up a lot higher, it doesn't really look all that big. When you start limiting them to a 32 square foot sign, it's essentially not legible or readable from a farther distance. So address the cumulative size approach, so combining that with the individual size limits to provide more flexibility for businesses. We're trying to find ways here where we can be a little more creative in allowing someone to kind of determine how they want to go about putting signs in their business. Some signs it makes sense to have just one larger one. Some signs, some businesses it makes sense to have, you know, 2 slightly smaller ones. And again, just, you know, highlighting here the maximum number of attached signs. So that's, you know, there is something like that in the code now, but this would be increasing it in certain circumstances, but having it practically limited by the total size of the signs. And just for clarification, so on the 1 square foot for each linear foot of building frontage, not to exceed 64 square feet. This is probably one of the most common methods that municipalities use to regulate how much signage a place can have. It can get kind of tricky in certain areas, but it's a very common method. So basically, if you had a property that had 32 square feet of frontage, that's the max you'd be able to go up to. If you had a property that has, again, Market 32 has about 900 feet of frontage. So they're not allowed a 900 square foot sign, but they'd be allowed a 64 square foot sign. Here's just an example of some sign comparisons. Sure, again, probably very hard to see, but I guess some of that drives home a point here. So if we're looking at this building here, you know, let's say a building in a mixed-use district, you can see in the top left-hand corner, that's a sign that's up there. You might not even be able to see it. That's 6 square feet. Going all the way over the top right, that's 20 square feet. Bottom left, 24. And then all the way to the bottom right is a 64 square foot sign. So 64 square feet certainly sounds like a lot. We're not proposing that for wall signs in any of those, in any districts like this. This would be, that size limit would be for the districts where buildings are set back farther from the road and they have significantly larger frontages. We would be, in most cases, differing on the districts, going between a 24 square foot sign and a 32 square foot sign. And as you can see, there's not much of an impact, really, if any, of having a 32 square foot sign on the adjacent like shop fronts or businesses or other properties. But it does allow for a little bit better visibility. The second table, and I'll try to get through the rest of this, but the second table is for the detached signs. Again, going through the number, size, and height. So we, again, added a column for the cumulative size of all detached signs. So you have cumulative size for your attached signs, and then separately you have cumulative size for your detached signs. Similar to the attached signs, the residential districts essentially stay the same, with the R1L, R1M, R2 being limited just as they previously were. So that hasn't changed. The RT, RM, essentially the same as well. The RV is the difference here, where it's basically going from being treated the same as the other residential districts to now being allowed to have a 32 square foot freestanding or detached sign. That's the typical sign size for a moderate, small to moderate freestanding sign that we often find with these properties in that type of a district. That would be up to 5 feet. That's not changing either. The MUNE, MUNC district. So that, along with that district, those 2 districts rather, and the MUDT, the MUFW, MUFC, MUFS, and MUFM would all be allowed a freestanding sign now, and some of those previously weren't. The difference here is that, again, to the really good point that was made before, is that it's limited based on a characteristic of that property, so they're not just allowed in any circumstance. It's under footnote 2, says a detached sign shall only be permitted on a lot where the front yard setback of an existing principal building is greater than 20 feet. Again, this is language that we borrowed from a whole host of other municipalities, because where you don't typically want to see a freestanding sign in your downtown district, right? Because your buildings are brought up to the street. Same thing with your, form-based Central Ave. You don't want the freestanding signs there, but you do have the occasional properties that are were built 100+ years ago that are set back quite a ways from the street, they often will have a freestanding sign because a wall sign or projecting sign isn't really going to do much to notify someone of where that location is. So those would be essentially the exemptions to allow for a freestanding sign. The other districts here, so MU, CU, so this would go up from the, let me double check myself here, if it was 32 previously. So from 32 to the 50, still maintaining it as one sign, because what we've looked at was the size of the lot frontages throughout all the districts, so we did analyze that to kind of come up with a ballpark number here that we're attempting to get to. So MUCU generally has, just lot frontages that are a little bit wider than some of the others, but not all that wide in comparison to like the MUCH. So again, looking at the MUCH, the typical problem that we end up running into. So this would allow for a sign up to 100 square feet. Noting that many signs on Central Ave in that zoning district are 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times as large as that. So this would limit the size, although it would allow more than a 64 square foot sign. And I think the idea here is that if the code is now allowing a reasonable size for a sign, whether that's detached or attached, then asking for relief from that code becomes even more difficult because you've now been granted what we're hopefully establishing as a reasonable amount of signage. So in this case, the MUCH, this is the district we would allow the tallest signs, and that would be 15 feet. When looking at, unfortunately, we don't have the exact data just on every single sign that's in that district, but when looking at permits, variances, and comparing them to heights of other properties, the average freestanding sign size in that district is probably closer to 20 feet. We have some signs in that district that are 50 feet. We have at least 4 that are 30+ feet, and a couple that were just approved for 20 feet. And if you look at them contextually, they don't appear as tall given the nature of where they are. But again, here we're trying to be a little more conservative and raising that to 15 feet instead of taller. The MUCI district, I'll go back to the example of Albany Med, where they have several pylon signs. They were looking to replace one that kind of tells you where to go into the building and everything. They had a previous sign that I believe was 15 feet tall. They were looking for one that was 10 feet, but the max that was allowed, I'm blanking if it was 6 or 8, but they had to get a variance for that sign height. So we'd be allowing for those types of districts, again, to have a taller sign. The industrial districts, being mindful that they still are oftentimes, especially the I-1, they're often next to some of the residential and mixed-use districts, so not wanting to go too tall or too large with the signs. But when looking at the square footage, especially for the I-2, we have a lot of signs in that district that are quite large and set back quite far, so allowing them to be appropriately scaled at 100 square feet and allowing 300 square feet of cumulative size for that sign. And interestingly, just kind of looking at some different properties that actually restricts them more in some ways, because there are several properties that are quite large in the I-2 district that definitely have more than 300 square feet of cumulative size area. They might just not have one sign that's 100 square feet. So again, trying to provide more flexibility within the code in that sense. So kind of just went through it. We had the frontage-based approach, just like we did with the attached signs, and then allowing for detached signs in several districts that previously did not allow them. So this is an example. This is the MUFW, so the warehouse district. So those are 2 detached or freestanding signs. Those would not be allowed under the current code. The one on the right predates the code. The one on the left was replacing a prior one, but it did get a variance. These are signs that aren't allowed under the current code because of that district, but they would be under the new amendments because of that footnote indicating that if their building is existing and it's set back more than 20 feet, they can have a freestanding sign. So this is a good example of where, yes, they also have wall signs, but it would be more difficult to find them as you're driving down the road, whereas I think the need for a freestanding sign can be seen here. That's the slip 12 is the second sign, the black sign on the left-hand side. That's right. If you were to drive right past that sign, that would be on your right-hand side. Yeah. And again, just a size comparison for detached freestanding signs, because I know the numbers sound very large, but if you're looking at the picture on the bottom left-hand side, that's an existing sign that's about 120 square feet, displaying a lot of information for a very large industrial site. If you're looking at the two images where we've carefully taken the signs and scaled them appropriately, you see the one on the top, essentially half of that, you can't really get the full message on there. That's 64 square feet. And then you have a 100 square foot sign, which certainly comes a lot closer, but as you can see, it's smaller than what's there. Even in that picture, the sign that's to the right of the Ardent Mills is even larger than that one. So this is just an example of 100 square foot sign. Certainly can sound large, but based on the districts that they're in, as you can see, the scale and contextual elements, we believe that they're appropriate for that need. And I just say also, just by limiting the cumulative total, it means while you could have a 100 square foot sign, you're not going to have 20 of them because they'd be significantly over their cumulative total for those signs. Promise I am wrapping up here, but this is an example of the signage along Central Avenue. So everything that I've outlined in the green boxes there, those are all signs that are pre-existing that are non-compliant with the code. I believe every sign in that image is at least 20 feet. All the signs there in terms of square footage are, I think it was at least 75 square feet for all of those, some of them significantly larger than that. That's also an area, that's the MUCH district. This is the area where we typically see the highest volume of requests to deviate from the code, oftentimes to replace signs that are actually larger than what they're currently proposing to put in place. So with that, just a couple things I wanted to touch on quickly for comment-wise. So we just went through it with the residential districts. The changes there are really just limited to the RV district. The others have essentially stayed the same. We definitely have seen a significant rise in the number of applications to the Board of Zoning Appeals. That doesn't include the number of applicants who are turned away or denied an application and who don't pursue variances. We do have the provisions for menu boards in there, so it does specify a couple of things in terms of it having to be, I believe it's 15 feet away from a residentially zoned district. Currently under the code, there's no regulations on menu boards, so you could theoretically have a whole bunch and significantly larger. So we did take a look at surrounding communities and how they regulate them. A lot don't regulate them, but we did find a couple that do, and feel like this code is emblematic of what seems to work for those. I'd say with the menu boards, it does draw a distinction. It does provide an image too of what we mean by a menu board. The reason you wouldn't find them or can't find them just in any district is because they are specific to the drive-through facility and drive-through lanes, which are uses that are not permitted in most zoning districts. So you're not going to have that in pretty much, any of your residential and most of your mixed-use districts wouldn't allow that type of use, so it would regulate it in that sense. Just curious about the comment that was made about the severability. There is a severability section in the proposed, but maybe I misunderstood just what you were referring to. It's the 11, and that's, I believe, the same language that was in there before. I don't think that's changed. It was just moved, and I know there's a lot of different sections that were moved, so that might just be the reason that it was skipped. But if I missed what the issue was with that, I can certainly address that. Other element here was, it's number 11. So after the off-premises signs was 10. So after the chart for table 375, 409.2, there's then 9, which was the other displays, 10, which is off-premises signs, and then 11, which is the severability. Yep. So hopefully that answered that one. The RV, just kind of gone through that. Happy to provide examples of some of the districts and applications that we've seen for that, but we feel that the 20 square feet is within reason for that district.
Excuse me. Okay, I'm going to cut in here. I want to apologize. So I had committed to committee members that we would have a hard stop at 7. It's a good presentation. It was a meaty presentation, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate your time in putting that presentation together. So I don't want to rush the process. We will have follow-up meetings on this. What I'm going to ask is for committee members or anyone from the community, if you have any questions on this specifically, to please email Jake, who is our counsel, so that we can make sure we get that to the planning department before our next meeting, so they can answer any of those questions. I also want to thank former Councilwoman Judy Doce. For those who don't know, Judy was a key part of us, of the work that was done in 2020, 2021 when we rewrote the USDO. And I remember being in many of these long and difficult meetings, going through the 432-page document, page by page, line by line, and she was always a key player in those conversations. So I appreciate you being here and having and your willingness to be a part of these conversations. I hope that continues as we move forward with this. But it's for those who are watching can see that this is a lot of language and a lot of difficult material sometimes, but it's good information and it's good work that's being done. So if you've got any other final comments before we close up the meeting, I do want to honor that commitment. I know we have meetings next week as well, so I want to respect committee's members' times.
Yeah, first off, just thank you for the time. I didn't realize how long it had gone, so I apologize. Just trying to cover the material. The only other thing I just wanted to add, and we can go through this at a further meeting, is there, to Judy's point, there is still a section on the legal nonconforming signs. That provision is just under that legal nonconforming signs section. So there's the section on the legally nonconforming signs. I know you had mentioned that. So that is still in there. We had just tinkered with some of the wording a little bit, but it does have that language in the code still. Thank you.
Okay, and with that, again, I want to thank everybody for taking your time to be here today. Is there a motion to
Motion
adjourn?
to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Well, thank you again to the members and to non-members and to everyone who took the time. We will continue this conversation, and we'll see you again next week. Have a good evening.